be getting a notification. All right, and we live. So welcome. We'd like to welcome you all today to this week's edition of Believe and Do Good, the podcast. I'm your host, your brother John from yourbrotherjohn.com. And again, we want to thank y'all for tuning in to Believe and Do Good, the podcast. This podcast is about results, not religion. So whatever you believe, as long as you believe it wholeheartedly and it doesn't interrupt or hinder or hurt anybody else from accomplishing what they're trying to accomplish, do your thing. Our focus here is definitely about, really giving attention to your faith, your family, and really focusing. And again, having results on that basis. Today, we want to have a conversation about understanding grief and the grieving process, and also some tools for overcoming it. Of course, these past 2 years have been really trying and traumatic and all of that other stuff, right? And so in the U.S., I think they said over 950,000 families have experienced the loss of a loved one from COVID-19, and the impact of their passing definitely remains. And so with that in mind, we're actually kicking off this season of Believe and Do Good, the podcast, with a conversation with author, intuitive life coach, and grief specialist, Lisa Washington. And we're going to have an in-depth conversation about grief, coping with loss, and ways to honor your loved one's passing. For those who don't know, Lisa Washington is a certified intuitive life coach and grief specialist with over 20 plus years of caring for patients and families in the healthcare industry. She's also the founder of Simplifying Life Together, LLC. And under this business umbrella, Lisa assists clients with how to become a better version of themselves through individual and group coaching sessions. Lisa also has a grief coaching support group on Facebook. In addition, she's an author of Caregiver in the Last Hours, My Heartfelt Stories on Death and Dying. It was published in 2019. And more importantly, Lisa is a dedicated wife to Daryl and mother of 3 sons, Dale, Donovan, and DJ. I like what you did with the D's. Her educational background includes a bachelor's degree in human development from Eckerd College and a master's degree in human services counseling and life coach from Liberty University. Lisa's overall mission is to coach others to value themselves and to turn life and in turn live a better quality of life mentally, physically, and spiritually. Y'all, welcome to the broadcast. My sister, I didn't say that part, but this is my blood sister, Lisa Washington. Good morning, good morning, good morning. How are you? I got to unmute you. There we go. Try it now. How you
Hear
doing
me?
this morning? I can hear you good.
Good. Okay, now you can see.
Yeah. No, we got
Good
you.
morning, my dear brother.
I'm
Thank
so
you for
excited.
having me. Thank you for having me.
I wouldn't have it any other way. And so, kicking off this conversation, I'm really honored to be able to have this one-on-one with you, and really use this platform to have a conversation about your work and really just about the things that you're doing to help us really become better at understanding this grieving process. I see Kenitra is on, so thank you for joining Grand Rising. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. And so, was there anything that we left out of the bio?
No, I think you covered it all.
Okay, awesome. And just getting grounded, right, and centered in the space. One of the first things that we want to really cover is of course the book and some of the inspiration for the book. A caregiver in the last hours, my heartfelt stories on death and dying. And I know that can be a hard topic, for a lot of people. So how did you settle into that as a topic, or something that you wanted to express and really help people through?
Well, I came about it because, as some people may know and others may not, I worked for hospice for 17 years for patients and families. And with that being said, when I left, even while I was working there, but what I noticed when I left was like in our community that it is shunned, talking about death and dying. And
Mm,
I always knew that I wanted to put it into words, into a book per se, and
right.
spread the news that it's okay to talk about death and dying. We need to talk about death and dying so that we
Absolutely.
can how to cope with it better. So
And,
really, I
and
was inspired because I saw the lack of conversation house, uh, in the homes when I went and cared for
Right.
patients and families.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think that we shun or shy away from conversations about death and dying in our families? I mean, it's one of those things that's inevitable, right? They used to say the only two things I got to do
Right.
is stay black and die. So why do you think we shun
Right.
those
Yeah.
conversations?
Yep. Yep. You live and then you die. So absolutely, I think personally that one, it's due to generational passings.
Hmm.
Generation is just how it was. You did not talk about it, just such as with certain illnesses.
Right.
You don't hear people talking about such illnesses, diabetes, high blood pressure. I can recall that our grandmother Ma had diabetes and other illnesses, but they weren't like talked about. So
Right.
it wasn't talked. I didn't even hear it in conversation with other adults. So I think generationally it was just like shunned, and it was like that's your own personal business. And then um the question, to answer your question about why we're not talking about death, I think people are really afraid.
Mm.
You have all these different myths thrown out there. People may say, "Oh, so and so's coming back to get you," and so and so's coming back to see you. You'll hear people talking phrases like that, throwing
Right.
out things like that. But you hear people have like real conversations about how this person died. You might hear
Mm.
them talk about how they lived, but you don't hear people talk about the death in itself, and what they went through. What was that process for them? So I break that process down in my book, chapter by chapter,
Yes.
ranging from different age ranges. And I just cover that from front to end because I felt like we need that. People need to hear that. People need to understand it. For one, I really and truly believe it will help people to cope
Right.
with death and dying better, and as they
Right.
approach it. So let's just say down the road, somebody knows that somebody's going to have an illness, or they develop an illness, or illness they were born, and eventually they might, die from that illness. My book, reading my book, will help you understand some of those stories because I cover some of the age categories of, I believe like from in your 20s, maybe even I think I went back as far as being a teenager, taking care of a
Yeah.
teenager. I took care of so many patients. So it was a lot I could have packed. It probably could have been a 200-page book,
Right.
but I narrow it down to key stories, and all of them important, of course.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I appreciate about it is the way you start the process, and something you just lifted up in your response was you had me thinking about the caregiver aspect, right? And in the book you start, the first chapter is becoming a caregiver. And I'm seeing just with my friends and people who are in my circle, where they're starting to accept responsibility to care for either their parents or grandparents and loved ones, and that process of becoming a caregiver, is how you start, the book off. Would you talk a little bit about what led you into your experience as a caregiver?
Yes, absolutely. Well, so you heard me reference to our grandmother. That was,
Hmm.
and I talk about that at the beginning of the book as well, and I share that story. That was my quote unquote introduction into caregiving. And I
Right.
also state in my book that we are culturally um, and naturally born caregivers. Like it just comes automatically. That's what you do. It's another thing that's generational. You just
Right.
take care of the other person. You know what I mean? And so, but going back to me personally, that started with Ma, our granddad, and for
Yeah.
some people say Ma Dia, but we say Ma.
That's right.
But it started with caring for her, and when she had her diabetes started to take over and affect her, and she had to have her legs amputated one by one above the knee. And I remember her
Hmm.
coming to St. Petersburg, visiting with us, and asking me, did I want to stay with her? Well, of course I did, because every summer I went to stay with her.
Right.
And those were the highlights. Those were my highlight years, going to stay with her every summer. And so when she asked me to come live with her, to assist her, partially to assist her with her care, I elated. I all I would be actually doing, but that's where my caregiving started. When she had lost both her legs, she was kind of, I won't say she was bedbound, because she has, and people in the medical field will know what I'm talking about. She had what we call a Hoyer lift. And the Hoyer is a like a triangle put up over the bed to help get patients who have legs that have been amputated, to get up out of the bed and sit up in the bed and be transferred to the chair, to the wheelchair. So she
Right.
had that. So I had to learn how to do that at a young age. No experience in the medical field at that time, because I'm still in high school. So
Right.
I had to,
Right.
she showed me how to use that and how to help her. So back on it, that was my introduction into caregiving. And I would do that. I would help her get up in the morning, transfer her to her wheelchair. Now, mind you, she could do most of it herself. So it was either me or granddaddy helping her transfer her into that wheelchair. But when I look back on it, I just think that was amazing for a teenager, you know what I mean, and a young
Yeah.
teen, to grasp all that and to take it, and to take ease. And I did, because like I said, I think it's a generational cultural thing, was to just naturally care for the other, especially people that you
Right.
love.
Right. And then being thrust into that with having no experience, what were some of the
Hmm.
challenges that you faced and that you've seen others face when because a lot of like you said, this situation was not something that you were prepared for, not something that you went to school for, and it's a lot of folks like that where it's like, look, if we got to put a bed in the living room, we're not going to send them out to be
Right.
cared for by somebody else. So what, you know, just that kind of that orientation, what would you say to people who feel like, they're not qualified to care for their loved ones, and what type of resources or support are there for people who may need that type of assistance with caregiving?
Well, there are all types of resources out there. Thank God for Google. So in this day and age, we could literally click Google and get a lot of information. However, depending on the illness, so if it is a terminal illness, most people have heard of hospice, and if they haven't, so you can reach out to hospice. You can reach out to your different home health agencies and get information as it relates to how to care for a loved one. I'm sure they would be willing to share that information with you. More importantly, because most people, like you said, some people are not comfortable with actually doing the physical care
Right.
of a loved one. It's too much mentally. They can't take that in. That first of all, they can't get to the acceptance part that someone's that sick. And so I would recommend reaching out to some of those home health agencies, reaching out to hospice. Hospice has an array of resources that many people don't know about: chaplains, counselors, social workers, and they work outside of hospice as well, meaning they go be above and beyond. So
Right.
I'll give you an example of above and beyond. When I worked for hospice, and I believe it still exists to this day, that after I've cared for a patient and they've passed away and you were in the home with the family, because you care for the family as well, uh,
Okay.
hospice follows you up to a year after. And not too many places do that.
Right. Right.
So they follow you. They offer counseling to you so that you can get through that grieving process. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think, that once hospice is in, your loved one passes away, that's it, and I'm done. But they offer those resources. So there are an array of resources. But like I said, hospice, home health agencies, you
Hmm.
know, word of mouth, and Google. If you don't, push come to shove.
Be selective with your Google. And I
Yes.
thank you for that. And I want to just take one of the comments from Miss Teresa Jones. She's watching on YouTube. Thank you, Miss Teresa, for always supporting. She lifted up this comment. She said that dealing with the death of a child is the most difficult one that I've lived through. And we're in a stage right now, because we opened up the show talking about the deaths related to COVID, right? And again, one of the things that was important to me with bringing you on and the context for this was because, and again, United States, over 950,000 people have lost their lives. But in Pinellas County, it's been like 70,000 families have succumbed, and that's just to COVID-19. And then on top of that, we have, like this youth and gun violence. And I think last year there was a record that was broken in St. Petersburg, where there were like 30, murders or homicides. And so when we talk about understanding the grieving process, a lot of times I've seen, where if you lose a loved one suddenly to like gun violence, there's, like, okay, you get your RIP T-shirt, you have the funeral and the homegoing, so, but somebody pointed out to me that Monday morning is what they called it. The Monday morning,
Mhm.
like after the Saturday, family get together, the repast. That Sunday, people are still calling, but then everybody goes home that Monday morning, And so, what are some tips, that you would like maybe offer to people who may have recently experienced the loss of a loved one, and they don't have a support system, and they need to kind of understand this process a little more? What would you say to those types of folks?
So I would say to them, especially that Monday and that week or two after, give yourself that me time. Give
Mm,
yourself that time that you need. That means separate the space. And if you're in a space where you feel you need to be to yourself, don't be afraid to say so. Speak it.
right.
Speak what you're feeling to others. And it's okay to share with them and say, okay, this is really taking a toll on me. I kind of want to be by myself for just a little while. And then
Yeah.
and then I'll reach out. And then for those who are opposite that, and they feel like I need to be talking to somebody. I don't want to be alone. I don't want to, you know what I mean? I don't need that me time right now. That me time may come later, but right
Yeah.
now I want to be talking to somebody. I would also encourage those people to reach out to someone that is close to you, someone that you can share your most inner feelings with. And you don't have to worry about that being shared with anyone else. Because
Mm,
remember, you're grieving. So you
right.
may say things that they weren't aware of as it relates to that loved one. And this is
Yeah.
just keeping it all the way real. You may have some anger issues. I've dealt, with all kinds of people, all kinds of backgrounds. You may have some anger issues. Let's say if you lost a spouse, and it may be some things that went on that nobody know but you and that spouse, and then you got to find that dedicated person that you can share those most inner feelings with and say, I need to talk this out. And
Right.
then if you don't have that in your circle, then once again, I recommend reaching out to different home health agencies, reaching out to a hospice, or reaching out to counselors, searching for counselors to get that type of help that you need. Some people don't want to reach out to counselors because they don't want to be, I don't want to feel like I need therapy, you know. So then you have people such as myself, grief coaches and
Right.
specialists is what I call myself. And so people don't know the difference. So the difference between a grief coach and a grief counselor is that grief counselors go into counseling for an array of reasons, but the meaning behind it is often that they have the authority to say, okay, I can write a prescription, I can
Okay.
recommend that you need some medication. You know what I mean? Different
Right.
counselors have that ability. They have that background. Grief coaching, we coach you to bring out what is out of you, what is subconsciously submerged, and you don't know it's there, or you know it's there, but you can't get it out. So we help you
Right.
bring that out, and we talk you along that process so that you can see for yourself that it was within you all along, and we're going to help you, we're going to guide you, we're going to assist you to come to whatever terms you need to come to with this grieving process, and talking about this loved one. And we have all kinds of techniques and activities and tasks that we do. So that's our direction, our lane. So we're not
I got you.
in the field of writing prescriptions and medication, and I'm not knocking that. So I don't want anybody reaching out to Miss Washington saying, I'm not knocking that. We are, and
Right.
because at the same token, to be honest, there's a time when we need medication too. I will have clients where I feel if they're beyond my services, and I feel like, okay, now it's time to transition to a counselor, to somebody else that can, that, where this person may need some medication down the road. It's going to
Gotcha.
take more than just talking. So, and as a grief specialist and a coach, I can identify, and I'll know when I need to come to that bridge and have that discussion with my client. But those are the differences.
I got you. And I appreciate that because I wasn't aware that it was, sometimes we use them interchangeably, but
Hmm.
I'm glad you lifted that up, that they're not actually the same thing, and not synonymous. And that's great. And I just want to lift up Miss Teresa's comment again. She's interactive. So she said, yes, that Monday morning is tough. I actually went back to work after burying my son on a Thursday. I had to stay busy and not sink into deep depression. Initially, I was angry with God. And just thinking about that, right? Um, because there are different responses and reactions, to the loss of a loved one. What are some
Hmm.
of those reactions that you've seen, and how do you like process that and help people to move through those different places? Like where do you eventually want to be, right? Right.
Hmm. 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 So to I help people process that by identifying where do you want to be.
Okay.
So we have to be clear on that. Where do you want to be in this grieving process? Where do you want to see yourself? If you're stuck, where do you want to be? What does that look like for you? So once we get that out of the way and we identify all those things, then we can move forward step by step by step, taking care of those things one at a time. People, like you said, process grieving in different manners, just such as Miss Teresa was saying, being angry with God. I will share a quick story. I remember when our dad passed away, I was angry with God,
Mm,
and I found myself um, questioning my faith, which at that time, I had been baptized probably before dad passed. I had been baptized probably 2 years prior as a Seventh-day Adventist. So I
right.
found myself questioning my faith and trying to understand why we lost him all of a sudden, because we didn't.
Yeah.
Dad's death was different, from some of my hospice experiences. And so losing him all of a sudden was very challenging for me, and I know for you as well.
Yeah.
And I had to process that one day at a time, but I sank in a state of depression. I remember quitting my job. I
Mm,
remember not working for 6 months. And I share this with you, brother. It was
yeah.
our dear mother. It was our dear mother who got me through.
Yeah.
She got me to tap back into that faith. And this is, and I'm sharing
That's
this
right. That's right.
because this is a story that needs to be shared. She got me to tap back into that faith. And this story needs to be shared because you don't see it a lot in our culture, in our Black culture, I'll say. At least I didn't. And
Right.
mom would call me every day and say, "How you doing? What did you do today? Did you get out the house? I need you to just get out, go walk," and things of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I started doing little stuff step by step with her guidance. But it was a constant check on me, and she worked me back into my old self. And
Yeah.
so looking back on it now, it's funny that I'm looking back on it now as a grief specialist, because that's kind of what it falls under, that spectrum. To
Right.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
was mom a grief specialist back then? You know, but she
Yeah.
took me step by step, day by day. And so I would say to people who are listening, that's why I said, if you have somebody that in your circle, if you have a few people, just 3 or 4 people in your circle that you can rely on, that that you can go to, that will call you. And if they don't call you, you can call them, and they don't mind stopping what they're doing and listening. I mean, listening is the number one key, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, An active listener is the best thing since sliced bread. I'm gonna tell you,
I swear.
because when you actively listen to somebody, you're not listening to reply.
Right.
You know, most often we listen to be ready to, because we think we know so much sometimes. But when you
Yeah.
just sit back and listen,
We ready to advise. Yeah.
right? And a lot of times, what I found when I was caring for patients under hospice, they didn't need to hear anything from me. They needed me to do just that, be that active listener, and not say a word. Maybe just nod my head. Maybe just hold their hand, because now remember they're dying, so they're
Yeah.
sharing all kind of personal stories. And the same for people who are grieving. When they're grieving, it's like reliving that death again, day
Mm.
by day. It's like experiencing that death all over again, as if it just happened, as if you just went to the funeral, as if you just made those arrangements, as if you just went to view the body before you had the actual funeral the next day to make sure everything's straight. All those things, you daily, you live in those things. They don't just go away. And I often tell people, grief is a process. It does not go away. It will be with us until we die.
Right. Right.
So we just
You,
learn to cope with it better. You learn to
you
cope with it better.
you just gave rise to a question for me, and I put a note in our private chat. If you maybe turn your computer down just a little bit, because we're getting a little bit of feedback. Um,
Okay.
but one of the things that I've heard from people about why they don't want to go into counseling is because they know that they're going to have to talk about the loss, and like what you just said, it feels like rehearsing it, reliving it, and they avoid counseling because they don't want to, quote unquote, rehearse or continually relive that experience. How do you get somebody past that point to see like how talking about it is a part of the healing process?
So I get people. I'm trying to turn my volume down. Are we still
Okay.
getting feedback?
No, it
Are we
sounds good
okay?
right now. Yep, sounds good.
Okay, good, good. Okay. So I'm sorry. The question was, how do I get people to talk
Yeah, so
about the
so
grieving process? Is
because
that
I've
it?
talked to people about counseling and therapy, and for
Mhm.
multiple issues, but specifically the loss of a loved one, and they don't want to talk about it because the conversation brings up those experiences, and it feels like like reliving it, rehearsing it, and you want to be strong in the moment, and you don't want to continually repeat what that experience was. And so how do you get a person past that so that they feel comfortable opening up and sharing, their experience?
So there are a lot of ways, but one way in particular is to say you could start that conversation with, how are you feeling, and just talk. You start them off by asking about them, because a lot of
Okay.
times when if you take the focus on the person that passed away, sometimes people are not in that space to start talking about. So if you start
Makes
talking
sense.
about them and how, yes, channel in on them and how they're feeling, direct all your attention to them, and how was your day, and how can I make your day better if it wasn't so good, what can I do? And then that eventually, believe it or not, or start opening up that door. Because it, depending on what they say, if they say, well, I'm feeling bad, they may say, I'm feeling bad because so and so died. Then there's your opening. You know what I mean?
Right.
But you let them guide. And so that's what I do. I let them be the
Okay.
lead.
Right.
So I'll throw certain questions out there and certain statements out there, and I'll let them be the lead. And then I know where to jump in and take them. And before you know it, we may be talking about the loss of mom or the loss of so and so. And it may not be in depth that first time. It may be
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit. And that's all they need. And as grief coaches and specialists, we recognize that's all they need at that time. So I would say to people that are in someone's circle and close, and they want to know that information, channel in on that person.
Right.
Ask that person how they're doing. Focus on them. And
No,
then
that
they
makes
may
sense.
bring up the conversation about the loved one. Let them be the lead to guide you into that conversation. Because if they may not do it that day, you know what I mean? They may not do it right away. It may be a week or two, but eventually you start talking and checking in on them and focusing on them. They be like, oh, they care about me. Then they
Yeah.
may open up about the other person, because once again, you don't know what they went through with that person that they lost. If it's a spouse, it's a sister, if it's a whomever, they may have not had the best relationships. I've seen that
Okay.
with that loved one that passed away. So they might be guilty, feeling guilty about certain things. And so that might be a reason why they don't want to talk about that loved one right now.
Wow. Again, it's just there's so many dynamics, right?
Yes.
Because I forgot about that part of it. Like we talking about losing loved ones, but you know, sometimes we lose loved ones and we're on bad terms with that person,
Yes.
and and that's a different experience from someone who you were a caregiver for them, and you were able to be there with them, and hold their hand and have those conversations, to help ease the transition and the pain of it. But then you
Mm-hmm.
have, like you said, it's if you're not on good terms with someone who you lost, and you're having like regrets, because I think that happens a lot, you know but it's just not something we think about, right? Like, dang,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
how do
And
you
then
work
and
with
then also
somebody? Yeah,
no,
go
no,
ahead.
no. And then also I wanted to tap in and share that that's in my book as well. So those different stories that I tell
Yes.
them in a way so that I share different ideas of how people process the death, and then, also a little bit on how they grieve the death of a loved one. So
Right.
I tell them in a significant way so that people can understand, and they can say, oh, well, chapter 8 or chapter 7 or chapter 6, I can relate to that story because that happened to me.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's stories in there about, similar to somebody not getting along with a family member, because that's what my experience was when I cared for patients and families. Everybody didn't always get along.
Yeah.
Everybody didn't always socialize and communicate, and have no communication in some cases. I had patients I cared for. They had children that lived out of state, and they was just basically, I hate to say it, but they were just waiting on their parent to die
Mm.
and to get whatever was left, gonna be left to them. So they had no communication with them. And then
Yeah.
me being the caregiver on the other end, of course, they're sharing their most inner thoughts with me about their families. So they're sharing this information. And it was patients where they wanted to have relationships with their children. They didn't know how to connect. They I had members that didn't want to have communication with their family members, and they were just stuck on it, and they weren't bending from it, and unfortunately they passed away with that mindset.
Right.
So you have different, outcomes and different spectrums on both sides as it relates to death and dying. And as a grief specialist and a grief coach, I identify all those areas, and then I can tackle those areas and get someone through this process, get them through this grieving process. Because a lot of people believe that they, in the beginning, of course, believe that they can't get past that.
Right. Right.
And a lot of people take to, I see a lot of people take to social media
Yeah.
to get through their grieving process. And what they're seeking is that attention back. And not to say that they might not have a circle outside of social media, but I see a lot of people doing that. And I think one of the reasons people do that is because they are somewhat afraid to tap into talking to a counselor or a
Mm.
therapist, and
Okay.
not knowing the difference. That's why earlier I was talking about the difference between a therapist, counselor, and a grief coach. So that you won't, I think, and I love being a grief specialist and a coach, because I think that takes some of the fear of having this over your head that I got to see a counselor, so it equals medication.
Yeah. And in
Most
today's
people say when
society,
you see a therapist or something, yeah, they relate that to I got to be on medication. So then they relate to that somebody's going to think I'm crazy or cool. I ain't all
right,
there.
or something's wrong with me, right? You know,
Right, right.
and then and then there's this other dynamic where you know, I've seen um I gotta be strong, you know,
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when a loved one passes, you know, I've seen and experienced it in some ways where, you know, you don't let yourself grieve, you don't allow yourself to grieve because you have to be strong for the family. What do you say to
Right.
people like that, right? Where you like they don't cry, they don't break down, and you know, the idea is like, if like I'm the strong one, and if people see me cry,
Mm-hmm.
they see me break down, then they gonna break down. And so, you know, we bottle it up and we hold it in, and we don't want, you know, to not be strong for the family. How do you address that?
So I address that by taking it slow. Once again, as I
Okay.
referred to earlier, channeling on the person, addressing them,
Yeah.
addressing how they feel. So when I tap into how you feel, most often I can identify right away if you're the strong one, if you're this person, if you're that person.
Okay. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like if you, I can base that best on our conversation. And so
Okay.
once I
Okay.
realized that, okay, this person is was the strong one family, and which, it's funny because looking back on it as a caregiver when I was working in the field, I had to identify that as well. Like
Right.
which ones, who was the strong person and who was the this person that could not take it.
The
And
one that's gonna
looking
fall
back
out
on
and be
it,
all over the casket and laying all in
right,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah. Talk about they want to get in the casket with the person.
yeah,
Nope,
yeah,
that
yeah.
one. But all jokes aside,
Yeah.
yes. So when I would identify who was the one trying to be the strong one, I would say certain things to them. Like it's okay.
Yeah.
And I would throw out key words about themselves. You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Or do you exercise used to do? You know what I mean? Before all this happened. So you tap into what they used to do before the person got sick, before you went through that process. And then when you tap into that, you can pull that back out and say, you can recommend them doing those things again, certain activities that might help
Yes.
them that they used to do, but they don't put on the back burner. So that would be one way
Okay.
to help a person being the strong one. And you know what? And then keep talking with them. And eventually you may see some tears. I
Yeah.
I would venture to say 75 to 80% of the time, talking with people, dealing with clients and stuff, eventually we got to those tears. Now, was it a ooh and just falling all out? No, some of it
Yeah.
was not, and some of it
Yeah.
was. But those tears eventually came. And then in some cases, the tears didn't come. But what came was the relief. I could
Yes.
see the relief and the release of that stress from talking with them, going through the different stages and tackling these different tasks and seeing them come alive again, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Seeing them go back, get back to their old self, seeing them they say they enjoyed doing prior to losing this person.
I love that. And also I'm gonna transition. Was is this coming weekend? You have an event coming up this weekend. We're gonna
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes.
we're gonna
March
talk a
12th.
little bit about let's talk about what this weekend in March 12th, and you know what's cooking.
Yes. So I have a support group, a workshop coming up, and it's called You versus You, Grief Coaching. And it's going to be a workshop that I'm holding at Bay Vista.
Okay.
And this Saturday from 9 a.m. to 12, you can go on Eventbrite and still registering. I have a few spots left. Tickets are going fast. I have a few spots left. I only reserved 20 spots
Okay.
for COVID reasons. I don't want people to feel all bunched up, but we're going to be outside. We're going to be facing the water. It's going to be, having that waterfront front view. It'll be serene. It's going to be awesome. We're going to do activities. We're going to talk. I'm going to speak on understanding grief and
Mhm.
certain areas of grief, what that covers, how to cope with grief, how to
Right.
process losing a loved one. So I'm going to cover certain areas of the grieving process, but we are going to have fun doing it. I promise you.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of the things I've participated in a session with you, and it was an amazing experience. And one of the things that I found that sometimes we may be grieving and not know that we're grieving. Like
Yes.
because the you may have some time or some space in between the loss of a loved one. Because I was actually, the session that I attended, it was shortly after the passing of my mother-in-law, and so I was
Hmm.
there in my mind, thinking that we were going to be addressing her passing, and we did. But then as you started doing your thing, because it's like, I don't know how you do it, but just the way you started, kind of peeling back the onion. And I realized that even, 20 to 25 years later, I was still grieving the loss of my father, and never
Hmm.
fully processed that. And so I say, for people who may hear this and was like, okay, well, I'm good. I lost my loved one, 10 years ago, 4 years ago,
Hmm.
5 years, or however long. It doesn't have to be, a recent loss. That's what I learned. I learned that we still may be grieving, the loss of a loved one, that we have some time in between. Have you seen that, just again in your sessions, with folks, where you go in there for
Yes.
one loss, but then you find out that there's other losses that need to be addressed as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And to your point, that's back to what I said earlier when I made the statement earlier. Grieving is a process, it's a journey.
Hmm.
It stays with us forever. It stays with us, the person who's living, it stays with us until we die. So you just learn
Right.
how to cope with it better. And you
Ah,
have to identify how you can tap into that and what works best with you. So if that means, okay, I've gotten to a point where I can't, my circle isn't good enough, so
mm,
then I recommend reaching out to someone such as myself, a grief coach, a grief specialist, or a counselor if you feel you need a little more than that, because now that I've
right.
identified what the differences are. So if you feel like you're needing medication, you go in a different direction. But if you're feeling like I need somebody on a professional level to get me through this thing without medication, I'm your girl,
Okay. I
so to
love it.
speak.
I love it.
I'm the person for that. And so knowing that uh, grief is a journey and a process, that is why when certain people will say, make the comment, oh, I'm okay because it was 20 something years ago or 30 something years ago, they would be in for a big surprise in one of my workshops, to just like you say, you were surprised that
Yeah.
to find out that you were still grieving all that time. Because a lot of times people think that you cover, people look at getting past grieving as a class sometimes. Like, I took that class, I passed it, I'm good. So
Right.
why would I go to a workshop? Why would I go to something? Because I'm done with that. I did that. That was 20 some years ago. And then
Yeah.
you got people that say, well, it was just a year ago, and I'm fine. Everything's working fine in my life. You know what I mean? They will say
Yeah.
that to you, and you don't know that because that's what they're saying. That's all you got to go on. But someone like me, I could have a just a general conversation and start talking a little bit about death and start talking about my experiences and sharing them with them. Then they open up and start sharing their experiences, and it's like an aha moment. They realize, like, oh, I haven't really fully coped with this.
Yeah.
I didn't really get past with this, because you'll know that they didn't get past it, because you'll start seeing the emotions, and you know what I mean, what it's making them feel like in that moment talking about it. And then it's like, oh, okay, you know what, maybe I need to talk about this a little more. Not so much I need help, maybe I need to talk about this a little more,
Yeah.
so that I can continue on with, if I feel like I'm in a good space, I can continue in that good space.
I love that. I love that. And so the workshop is coming up. It's on this Saturday, and it's, again, I'm excited about it. If you're dealing with the loss, I did see you talk about understanding grief, ways to cope with the loss, how to express
Mhm.
what you're feeling, because that's another one of the things I
Absolutely.
think that we bottle it up, and so being able to express it, and then ways to honor your loved one's passing, is another one of those things that'll be talked about. I see you got breakfast and brunch that's going to be provided. Right?
Yes.
Looking forward
Yes.
to that as well. And if there was like a final thought or a final message. Oh, and I also want to lift up the book. Like, y'all got to get this book. It's A Caregiver in the Last Hours, My Heartfelt Stories. And I want to just like give you like just look at the contents. And here's what I think is powerful as well. And it's to Miss Teresa's point about, you know, her loss. And it's so well written where you have stories and scenarios, and God bless you for like just the experience because this is like people's whole life. You may live your whole life and only have one or two of these, and you had all of these experiences, and you've been able to take that and use it as fuel to help other people. So I really appreciate that. But you talk about caring for a teenager. You know, you have a young adult patient experience in here, caring for adults, caring for the elderly. And then there's even a section in here that talks about when, you know, when the funeral goes wrong, you know, and, and,
Yes.
and and so it's just a beautiful thing. I see in here you also have, you know, the 5 stages of death. So folks who you know may not be familiar with those, like these are the things that are in there. And then there's a journal. There's a self journal prompt. How did you get to a
Mhm.
place where you thought that it was necessary to include that as a part of the book? Because I think that's very helpful as well, just having that journal.
Well, so the story behind that is when you reach out and you're trying to grow yourself in your business and in your book, because writing a book is having a business as well. So
Sure.
that came about when I um, accepted having a mentor by the name of Stephanie A. Wynn.
Shout out to Steph.
And as you know, my book, yes, yes, shout out to Stephanie, and awesome lady, awesome lady. And when me and her connected, I revamped my book because, as you know, the book came out in 2019 and I had a different cover, a different book cover.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
revamped my book with Stephanie. And so you have, hence, you have the different cover and the different addings to the book, which was what you just pointed out, being able to journal. And me and her sat down and we came up with that would be a good idea to have people
Yeah.
actually write their feelings and what you're feeling as a caregiver. And so then it catered it to the audience, which, you know, catered to people, whoever wanted to read the book and whoever was grieving and wanted to understand the death and dying process. But then it channeled it to caregivers in particular, like, so
Yes.
people who work in the field. Because now, having, you know, most people don't come in the field having had the caregiver experience. Some do, others don't. So for those that don't and didn't and don't quite get that process, and they want to be a hospice caregiver in particular, because that's more in depth, um,
Right.
being able to journal is key, because it's helping you express your feelings and what you're feeling, validating your feelings, and understanding your process of caring for this person, because you're the other person on the other end. Yes, they're the person that's dying and going through, and eventually they're going to go, but you're the other person that's going to be left, and then you go on to the next person. So I think
Right.
by journaling each section will help you, and prepare you in so many ways to be able to say, okay, I got some ideas of how I may cope with this issue, because it may be totally different from the last issue. It may be the same, but in
Right.
your own inner thoughts, you have read this book, you have journal, and you can go back and you can keep this book as your little personal journal. Carry it with you on the job. You know what I
That's
mean?
right.
And reference to it.
It's awesome.
So
Awesome.
that's how we
And
came
so
about that.
yeah,
I thought that would work out with many people.
and it is. It's really helpful. You know, reading it. I think the self journal prompts are phenomenal. And and here's the thing: it's simple. But as you start the process, that's when you start, like I said earlier, you start peeling back the onion and realizing, you know, like there's more to it than what you might have originally thought. And so I just
Mhm.
again want to thank you for your insight and really your passion for serving others. Um, and if there was like a final message that you had, a final thought that you'd like to share with folks, what would that message be?
My final thought is to never give up and always realize that there is hope. There is hope. When you lose someone, and even grief comes in many forms. So it may be a job, it may be um it may be a job, it may
Mm,
be just what else do I want to say? Losing a job, not getting a raise, not getting what you want in life. So you grieve that as
okay.
well. But just remember that there's hope and that there's another day that's going to come. And for our faith believers, we have to tap
Yeah,
into that faith and know that, hey, if God wakes us up and opens our eyes the next morning, it's a good day. It's a good day above ground. And we
that's
have to
right.
be thankful for that. We have to be thankful for that first and foremost. And then we have to sit and meditate within ourselves and say, okay, what can I bring to this day? What can I add to this day? Who can I add value to? Who can I make smile today? Or vice
I love
versa. Who can make me smile? Who can I tap in and who can I call to help me get through the day? If I'm a need it, I'm on the receiving end. Just realize that there's hope and it works both ways. Try to tap into that hope. And then when all else fails, if you feel like you don't have that circle or you don't have that person that you can reach to, tap into your resources. Look into getting a grief coach, a grief specialist, a counselor. Don't be afraid to reach out and get help. That's the most biggest thing, is that people don't want to feel like they need to have be in a position where they need help. It's okay to
right.
be in a position where we all need help. And it's not just with grieving. We need help with some of, a lot of minor
Every,
things,
everything.
simple things. Yes. Absolutely. So just don't be afraid to tap in and to yourself and reach out for help and realize that hope is there. And if you have hope, we're going to get through a lot of
Yes,
things in life.
yes, absolutely.
And be good
Well,
to
again,
yourself. Practice being the best version of you. When you tap into yourself and practice being the best version of you, all those other things will start to line up. Now, will there be hurdles? Will there be challenges? Of course. Will there be stumbling blocks? Of course. But knowing that there's hope right there hanging up above your head, it's going to keep you
mhm,
going. Like, okay, I can face this, and then if you're in a position where I might not be able to face this, sometimes you have to take a step back. And
right.
what's the song by Donnie McClurkin? Um, Sometimes we have to be
Stand.
still, stand, just
Ah,
stand
yeah,
and be still.
yeah,
Sometimes we have to do that. We have, and it's called giving you that. It's called giving yourself that me time. It's
yes.
tapping into me. Like, okay, I'm going to self-evaluate. And that's another thing I would like to leave people with. We have to constantly self-evaluate daily. Tap into
Right.
what life looks like for you and what you want life to look like for you.
I love it. I love it. And we're going to keep this conversation going. But it's just amazing. And again, I want to publicly thank you for the work that you do. And when we talk about the strong person in the family and the one that's there, like you are that strong person for our
Oh my
family.
goodness.
And I mean that because like we know when anything pop off, and it's a lot of stuff that's popped off, right? But especially when it's
Yes.
losing a loved one or just being there, like your caregiving spirit, it has always been present. And I want to thank you just for the way that you've supported me through my journey, as my big sister, and as my friend, as my grief specialist, as bouncing ideas. And I just want to really let you know how much I appreciate you and all that you do. And for those who are watching, like if you really need somebody to talk to, you need somebody that's going to be there, that's going to keep it a buck with you, help you get through this process. She has the skill set to do it, has the heart for it, the passion for it, and it's just amazing. Like the journey, to watch you in your journey and where you've come. I just want to, this is me, my version of giving you your flowers, because it's been amazing, and I really appreciate you
Uh,
and all that you do.
I thank you so much. And all that right back at you, because I'm so proud of you as well, brother. And I really want to thank you for giving me this platform this morning and having me on. It's been it was very calming and very easy to do. One, because you're my brother, but two, because no, two, to be honest, two, because I watch your other platform, the Tampa Bay Breakfast Club,
Breakfast, yeah.
and how you make people feel comfortable and calm on different subjects of all matters and all backgrounds. And so you just make it so easy for people to come on and be themselves. It's not a
Thank
I got to do this, I got to do this, or speak this way or speak that way. I can just,
you.
as they say, keep it real with Brother John. So
I appreciate
I
that.
appreciate
Thank
it. I
you.
love you so much. Thank you. It was an honor.
Thank. All right, we'll be in touch. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye bye. All right, brothers and sisters. Again, for those of you who would like to get more information, you can go to simplifyinglife.com. Also on Facebook, you can go to Facebook. We shared it on the Facebook page. If you'd like to sign up for the event, it's coming up this Saturday, March the 12th. It's going to be at Bay Vista Park. It's from 9 a.m. to noon. And again, it's a waterfront view. And it's you versus you, a grief workshop with author, speaker, intuitive grief specialist Lisa Washington. And we want to encourage you all to continue to seek the help that you need, get the support that you need, and know that there's resources available. We also want to thank you for tuning in to the Believe and Do Good podcast. Make sure that you like it, share it with a friend. It's so many things that we're going to be covering in this season. And I'm not going to do it by myself this time, y'all. We're going to have help and we're going to have support. And so look forward to it. Up next, for those of you who are watching on Facebook, you can go over to the Tampa Bay Breakfast Club, because I'm actually going to kick it off to the Tampa Bay Breakfast Club. Also, our Power Plug Radio family, you can actually tune in if you're not watching on Facebook. If you're on YouTube and you want to check out the Tampa Bay Breakfast Club, they're up next at 11 o'clock on powerplugradio.com. And again, we want to thank you all for tuning in to Believe and Do Good. I'm your brother, John. And again, it's not about religion. It's all about results. You take care of yourself. Be good to yourself. Be a friend of yours. And we'll see y'all next week. Peace.